Every time I come out here, Vinny's doing a job and you're holding his hand.
Me and him split everything. We started yesterday.
Get your hands dirty for a change. Do some welding and grinding instead of watching everybody else do it.
Every bike that needs to get built gets done. Everybody's working at all times. And you know what? 10 years. This is the kind of stuff we've been dealing with for 10 years.
He built the bike that carried a piece of the World Trade Center. He made millions of people cry watching him weld in silence. And then his own father tried to take it all away from him in a courtroom. This is the real story of Paul Teutul Jr., the boy who grew up in a welding shop, the man who became a television icon, and the son who lost his father the same year he found his own name. Paul Teutul Jr. didn't grow up like other kids. While his classmates were riding bikes around the neighborhood, young Pauli was already spending his afternoons inside his father's business, Orange County Iron Works. He wasn't just visiting. He was working. Sweeping floors, watching welders, learning the language of steel before he'd even finished grade school. His father, Paul Teutul Sr., ran a tight shop, and there was no separate set of rules for his own son. If anything, Junior had it harder than everyone else on the floor. Mistakes weren't quietly corrected. They were called out, sometimes loudly, in front of the whole crew. Some of the workers thought it was unfair to be that hard on a kid. Senior didn't see it that way. He believed discipline built character, and he wanted his son to earn every bit of respect he ever got. By his early teens, Junior wasn't just tolerating the work anymore, he was good at it. Genuinely good. He had an eye for design that his father, a man who valued raw strength and function over style, didn't always share. Where Senior wanted something built strong and built fast, Junior wanted it built beautiful. That tension between raw power and refined design would define their relationship for the next 3 decades, first as an asset, and eventually as a fault line that cracked their family in two. There's a version of this story where a strict father and a talented son simply build an empire together and everyone lives happily ever after. That's not this story. What actually happened is messier, and honestly more interesting, because it's a story about how the exact same qualities that made Paul Teutul Jr. brilliant at his craft were also the qualities that eventually put him at odds with the one person who taught him everything he knew. Junior chose a different educational path than most of his peers. Instead of a traditional high school track, he enrolled in a vocational program that let him spend half of each school day mastering metalwork, welding, blueprint reading, understanding how steel bends and holds under pressure. Teachers who worked with him have described him as a natural, someone who seemed to understand the material on an intuitive level most people never reach. He wasn't chasing a diploma to hang on a wall. He was chasing mastery. It's worth pausing here, because this is the part of the story that often gets skipped over in favor of the television drama. Long before there were cameras in the shop, long before anyone outside of upstate New York had ever heard the name Teutul, there was just a kid who genuinely loved the work. He wasn't performing dedication for an audience. There wasn't an audience yet. He'd spend hours after his classmates had already gone home, running the same weld over and over until it looked exactly the way he wanted it to look. That kind of quiet, repetitive discipline doesn't happen because someone is being forced into it. It happens because something about the work genuinely clicked for him. When he came back to the family business full-time, he wasn't the kid sweeping the floor anymore. By his late teens, he was running the shop's railing division, which at the time made up a significant portion of the company's revenue. That wasn't handed to him because he was the boss's son. He earned it by producing designs customers were willing to wait longer and pay more to get. He also had to manage a crew that included men decades older than him, several of them skeptical of a teenager giving them instructions. Over time, most of them came around, because the work spoke for itself. Somewhere in the middle of all that success, something in Junior started to feel unfinished. Railings and staircases were steady work, but they weren't what he dreamed about at night. What he actually wanted to build was something that moved. Around that time, his father started tinkering with motorcycles again, almost as a side hobby, and asked Junior to help him put one together. What Senior didn't expect was what his son had already been quietly sketching in a notebook after hours. When he saw those drawings, something shifted. This wasn't a kid doodling bikes for fun. This was a designer. Not long after, the two of them made the decision to build motorcycles for real, as an actual business, funding it with money pulled from the family's ironworks company. Orange County Choppers was born. The ownership split from the very beginning set the tone for everything that would follow. Senior held the majority stake. Junior held a minority share. In the early days, it didn't seem to matter much, because there wasn't much to divide. They were working out of a small, cold shop, building their first bike, a machine called True Blue, over the course of several exhausting months. When they debuted it at Daytona Bike Week in 1999, the reaction told them they might actually be onto something. But being onto something and actually surviving on it were two very different things. The first couple of years of Orange County choppers were brutal. Money was tight. Suppliers wanted cash up front they didn't always have. Junior has talked about working extremely long days, sometimes sleeping at the shop just to stay on schedule. Father and son argued constantly, not for a camera, because there was no camera yet, but out of pure stress and survival. Every bike they finished barely covered what it cost to build. This is an important detail that a lot of retellings gloss over. The fighting between Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. didn't start because a TV producer showed up looking for drama. It predates the cameras entirely. Two strong-willed people, one demanding and old school, the other quietly stubborn and detail-obsessed, were trying to build a business from almost nothing, under real financial pressure, with their family's money on the line. Of course there was tension. What the show would eventually do wasn't invent that tension. It was put a spotlight on something that had already been simmering for years, and then it kept that spotlight on, week after week, for a national audience. It's also worth remembering just how close the whole venture came to never happening at all in those early months. There were stretches where the shop genuinely didn't know if it would make payroll, let alone become a household name. Junior has described those early years as some of the hardest of his life, not because the work was hard, but because the uncertainty was constant. You can build the most beautiful motorcycle in the world, but if you can't pay the electric bill that keeps the lights on in the shop, none of it matters. That kind of pressure has a way of exposing exactly who people are underneath, for better and for worse. Then came the call that changed everything. A television producer had come across coverage of their motorcycles and pitched a documentary-style show following the shop. Senior, by most accounts, was skeptical and blunt about it at first. Junior was outright opposed. He worried that putting cameras in the shop would turn their family's private tension into public entertainment, and that fear turned out to be exactly right, just not in the way he expected. The show, American Chopper, premiered in 2003, and it became a phenomenon almost overnight. Within a few episodes, millions of people were tuning in every week, not just to see finished motorcycles, but to watch a father and son build something under real pressure, arguments, and all. What a lot of longtime fans latched onto wasn't the yelling. It was Junior's process. There's a well-known sequence from the early seasons of him building a gas tank in near total silence. No dramatic music, no arguing, just focus and craft, and it became one of the most talked-about moments the show ever produced. People who had never touched a welder in their life started paying attention to metal fabrication because of him. The show turned Orange County Choppers from a small family business into a nationally recognized brand almost overnight, and it turned Paul Teutul Jr. into one of the most recognizable young craftsmen in the country. Think about what that actually meant for a young guy who, only a few years earlier, had just been the boss's kid sweeping up metal shavings. Suddenly he was recognized in airports. Suddenly people who had never ridden a motorcycle in their life knew his name. The show didn't just document a motorcycle shop, it built an entirely new kind of celebrity, one built around genuine skill rather than the usual reality television formula of manufactured personalities. And underneath all of that new attention, the actual dynamic in the shop hadn't changed. Senior was still Senior. The pressure was still there. It had just been given a much, much bigger stage to play out on. There's also a version of this that's easy to miss if you only remember the show for the arguments. For a long stretch, the arguing and the artistry existed side by side, and both were real. Fans weren't wrong to love the show for the fights, and they weren't wrong to love it for watching Junior work either. Both things were true about the same family at the same time, which is part of what made it so compelling and, in hindsight, part of what made it so hard on the people actually living it. One build in particular stands out as the emotional high point of his early career. In 2003, Junior led the design and construction of a motorcycle built as a tribute to the firefighters who died on September 11th. It wasn't a marketing gimmick. He personally welded a fragment of steel recovered from the World Trade Center onto the frame, and the bike carried hundreds of hand-painted emblems, one for every firefighter who lost their life that day. When that motorcycle was later damaged in an accident, the New York Fire Department treated its recovery with the same care they'd give a fallen member of their own. Years later, in 2011, Junior built a second tribute piece connected to the 9/11 memorial, unveiled at an event that drew New York City's mayor and members of the memorial's board. People who were there have described grown adults breaking down in tears in front of the bike. It's one of the clearest examples of what Junior's work actually meant to people, beyond the television drama. Behind the artistry, Junior was also quietly becoming a serious technical innovator. In the years that followed, he began adopting modern digital design and modeling techniques that dramatically cut down the time it took to develop complex custom shapes, work that had previously taken many multiples longer using older methods. He also taught himself the programming language used to control CNC manufacturing equipment, which meant he wasn't just designing the bikes anymore, he could program the machines that helped build them too. He'd gone from an apprentice sweeping floors to someone operating at the intersection of hands-on craftsmanship and modern manufacturing technology. But while his career was climbing, the relationship with his father was quietly eroding. In the mid-2000s, Senior formalized Junior's ownership stake in the company at 20%, while keeping full operational control for himself. On paper, it looked like a reasonable structure. In practice, it created a pressure cooker. As Junior's designs increasingly became the face of the brand and the reason fans tuned in, the balance of public attention started shifting away from Senior, and that shift did not sit well with a man who had built the company from nothing. Arguments that used to stay behind closed doors started happening constantly, both on camera and off. Longtime crew members have described a workplace where tension could spike at any moment, and it wasn't limited to Junior. Other employees on the show occasionally bore the brunt of Senior's temper as well. The breaking point came in September 2008. What started as a dispute over Junior's schedule escalated into a screaming match that has since become one of the most replayed moments in reality television history. A moment that involved thrown furniture and ended with Senior firing his own son, on camera, in front of the crew. It wasn't just a bad day at the office. It was the public collapse of a relationship that had been fraying for years, playing out in front of millions of viewers. What's strange, looking back, is how that single moment has since become almost a punchline online. It's been turned into countless memes, clipped and reclipped for laughs, used as a stand-in for any over-the-top family argument. And there's nothing wrong with people finding humor in it. But it's worth remembering that on the other side of that meme is a real family that actually went through this, on camera, with no do-overs, no editing that could soften how it actually felt in the room that day.